nobody can imagine.
Our experts react.
What do you do?
Oh my gosh! Jaw-dropping.
Nope, 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 all the way back home.
It doesn't get better than this.
Don't miss all new episodes of Weather Gone Viral, Sunday nights at 9, here on the Weather Channel.
Breaking right now on the Weather Channel, New Orleans, Mayor LaToya Cantrell is holding a briefing on Zeta. Let's go ahead and listen in.
Well, good afternoon again, and thank you all so much for being here. As yet, we are braced for another hurricane coming to the city of New Orleans. As we have demonstrated throughout this hurricane season, even prior to the hurricane season starting, that the city of New Orleans is prepared. Seems like more and more prepared every single time, and we're wanting to encourage our residents, our visitors, to not have any fatigue, that now is not the time to lay back. It's the time to continue to stand firm and be prepared to respond to whatever comes our way. I'm joined here this afternoon with our Director of Homeland Security, Colin Arnold. I'm joined also by Director of Public Safety and Homeland Security, Colonel Everett. Also, Dr. Jennifer Vegno, who is our Director of the Health Department of the City of New Orleans. Also with us is my Deputy CEO, Ramsey Green of Infrastructure, and also Gassan Corbin, who is our Director of the Sewage and Water Board. And also have our Superintendent of the Sewage and Water Board with us again. And we welcome all of these leaders who have just been relentless in not only preparing our city, but just standing tall and firm throughout everything that has come our way. Zeta is expected to impact our region tomorrow afternoon and into tomorrow evening. May strengthen again, and with the expectation of arriving as a Category 1 hurricane. The city of New Orleans will do an early dismissal tomorrow at 12 noon. The storm appears to be moving very quickly, which is a good thing. We don't want it to sit, rest over us, but we're looking at wind. Again, similar to what we kind of saw with Delta, but we're looking at wind. Strongest expected impacts, that's again supposed to be wind, could lead to power outages. That's one thing that we really do get concerned about when it comes, of course, to wind. We need folks to prepare now, get the supplies that you need, make a plan, stay safe, stay home. Also, as it relates to sandbags, and Colin will touch on this as well. You know, we activated 3 areas throughout the city. There is still sand available. Colin will give you more information as it relates to those areas. And just want to continue to thank the New Orleans City Council members who help us deliver sand and make it available to residents. It really is a strong partnership. Department of Public Works, it's sand, Sewage and Water Board, and the like, put it out there. And Sewage and Water Board's here. We've been here before, as I mentioned from the very start of this, over and over again this year. We're no strangers to it. 7 times, of course, in the cone of uncertainty is unprecedented, but again, we stand ready and prepared, and wanting to, again, encourage our people to not have fatigue as it relates to being prepared in the storms that are coming our way, this one again being Zeta. So with that, you know, we have made it known as of yesterday and leading up in preparation. So with that, I'm going to pass it over to Colin, and I'll be back.
And we're just getting an update there from the New Orleans mayor on Zeta, and hoping that people are not weary, still need to stay vigilant and ready and prepared for what is expected to re-strengthen back to a hurricane as it approaches the Louisiana coast and the Mississippi and Alabama and Florida coastlines, with hurricane conditions or tropical storm conditions expected. Hurricane conditions expected closer to the center and a little bit farther away from the center. Tropical storm conditions expected, and we're expecting these impacts, the nasty weather, to extend well inland, well inland to central and parts of northern Alabama, North Georgia, and then eventually across the Appalachians through the mid-Atlantic and impacting parts of the Northeast. And Carl, one of the things we're going to have to watch for once again with this, with the multiple issues that come with tropical systems, will be that storm surge threat.
Yeah, that's right, Chris. It's going to be a relatively quick hitter as compared to so many storms that we've seen this season. But we're looking at life-threatening surge developing tomorrow afternoon, tomorrow evening, parts of Louisiana and Mississippi in particular there. That's going to be outside of the hurricane risk reduction zone in New Orleans. You may have heard about this very elaborate series of floodgates and levees put in place, a $14 billion system put in place after Hurricane Katrina. And so, all but the very strongest of storms will not be able to penetrate that system. And so, that's the good news here. This storm is not going to be enough to bring storm surge into New Orleans proper, though these levees do become a little bit more ineffective every year as Louisiana is sinking. There is subsidence there, and so they drop by a few millimeters every year. So outside of that system, that hurricane risk reduction system, that's where we expect to see that life-threatening storm surge. So please listen to your local officials and please evacuate if you are told to do so. We're going to have much more on this dangerous storm coming up in just a few minutes. Stay with us.
With the
And welcome back into our continuing coverage of what is now Tropical Storm Zeta, but is forecast to once again become Hurricane Zeta. I'm meteorologist Felicia Combs coming to you from Dolphin Island, one of the places that is once again going to be feeling impacts of another tropical system. It has been such a busy time for the Northern Gulf this hurricane season. I want to break it down for you a little bit as to why you should be getting prepared as soon as possible. So for places like Dolphin Island, the most reasonable time that you'll start to see these tropical storm force winds occurring will be later tomorrow afternoon and then especially tomorrow night. And I want to show you some things. So we're right here. Dolphin Island kind of acts as the barrier between the Gulf of Mexico to the south and Mobile Bay to the north. And you can see we're approaching low tide, but these waves are already beginning to crash just from the wind that we're seeing. But I want to show you something here because it's something that I've seen quite a bit as we've been traveling around. You'll notice these boards laying on the rocks. There's quite a bit of debris still around. Now, have they made great strides in cleaning up after Sally in places like Dolphin Island? Yes, they have. But is there still some debris like this wood that could easily become a projectile when you're talking about tropical storm force, hurricane force winds that are going to be picking up as we head into the overnight tonight? So you want to make sure, even if you don't have debris like that, you know those huge skeletons that everyone has in their yards right now, those blow-up Halloween decorations, things of that nature, bring them inside, bring the patio furniture inside, because if you're talking about wind gusts up to possibly hurricane force, those will not be there by Thursday at this time when we see Zeta moving off. So Carl, a lot of different things to think about. You've got the debris, you've got the patio furniture, the Halloween decorations, and you've got the rain. And this rain actually not associated with Zeta, but it's going to be coming in waves now. So I'd say get prepared while you can, and then you won't have to worry about it as the storm is approaching. So Carl, the sooner the better, I would say.
Yeah, no doubt about that. This thing is rapidly going to be approaching late tomorrow. Felicia, thank you so much. And here is the latest on the storm. As of 1 p.m., a 65-mile-per-hour tropical storm. Now, when you look at this satellite imagery, a lot of things to pick out here. One is you see the core there, which is intact, but you can also notice this channel, this cloud-free channel. That's some drier air that is wrapped into the circulation. So that's why it does not have a very classic appearance right now. But another thing you can see is how the high cloud is really spreading out across areas in the central Gulf. And that is indicative of a really favorable environment when you've got that light wind environment aloft. You see that outflow pattern like that. And so that's what this storm is going to be in. If it can manage to fend off that dry air, there's no reason to believe that it's not going to jump up in intensity. Right now, forecast to become an 85-mile-per-hour storm, but it's got a good, say, 18 to 24 hours to cook out there in the Gulf. And as it's coming towards the coast, then conditions are probably going to not be as favorable. The water gets cooler, the shear is going to increase, but it could still very well be a Category 1 hurricane as it is coming in. So we see these warnings, these advisories extending well inland because the storm is going to be rapidly moving inland, probably moving forward at 30 miles per hour. And so, it's going to be a period of probably 6 hours in any one location of the very worst weather. Winds picking up as we go into the afternoon tomorrow, and then really stepping up in southeast Louisiana by tomorrow afternoon, tomorrow evening. And that'll continue up into the Mississippi Gulf Coast and into New Orleans as well. So, Jackie, at least it is a quick hitter, but it is going to be a significant storm as it's moving in. Also want to quickly show you some video here from Riviera Maya. And you see the wind still whipping about there in the northeast part of the Yucatan. It's been a very tough month there. Of course, we were hit hard by Hurricane Delta in these areas. And you put that on top of the fact that the tourism industry has been hit so hard there in the Yucatan. And now another hurricane coming through last night. So really tough year in the Mexican Riviera there. Jackie, over to you.
Yeah, difficult times for sure, Carl. Well, let's talk about where Zeta is going to be going down the line, because we could see some interesting impacts and things that are going to happen as we head towards the end of the week with Zeta, but also some of the remnants from our winter storm. That cold air is going to come together with tropical moisture, which means we've got some snow on the table before the week is out. Boston, one of the areas we're watching very closely for this. Boston, I wouldn't rule out snow altogether, but I think west of you, it's going to be a little bit more likely. So that tropical moisture starts moving in here on Thursday. There's a look at the forecast where it's predominantly rain across the region, but as temperatures begin to cool down Thursday night, we see a big changeover and a wintry mix in spots, especially with elevation across parts of New York into Vermont, New Hampshire, and southern parts of the Greens. We could be talking about double-digit snow potentially. And there you see Boston early on Friday, perhaps a wintry mix. Here's a look at the snowfall forecast.
Fire, snow, ice, and Zeta. I'm meteorologist Chris Warren, along with meteorologist Jackie Jarrett and storm specialist Carl Parker. And Tropical Storm Zeta, our top story right now here on Weather Center Live. You're watching the Weather Channel, and it's a 65-mile-per-hour tropical storm. Yesterday, got up to an 80-mile-per-hour hurricane, and it is expected to get that strong again, if not stronger. Frankly, it doesn't look super impressive right now, but it is going over waters that are conducive and an area in the Gulf of Mexico which will favor development. With that, here is the latest forecast from the National Hurricane Center. 85-mile-per-hour hurricane is the current forecast by tomorrow morning. Now, that being said, in less than an hour, most at the very latest 1 hour, we will be hearing from the National Hurricane Center with an update on their forecast. We'll get a better idea of what the National Hurricane Center thinks we're dealing with and what we could be seeing here going forward, and whether or not this forecast is going to change at all, either with intensity or with where it is expected to go. At this point, hurricane winds are expected in Louisiana and in Mississippi, and tropical storm conditions expected across parts of Alabama, also Louisiana, Mississippi, and across portions of Florida. And tracking all of this storm right here as it's getting closer up to the Gulf Coast. We do have team coverage here on the Weather Channel, and that does include meteorologist Felicia Combs, who is on Dauphin Island along the Alabama coastline there, the Gulf Coast. Hello to you, Felicia.
Hey, Chris, thanks so much. Yeah, that's right. Dauphin Island, a place that is a great place that people love to come and visit. A lot of tourism to this place. It is kind of the barrier between the Gulf of Mexico to the south and Mobile Bay to the north. It is a beautiful island, but an island that has been rocked by storm after storm this hurricane season. Still in recovery after Sally just absolutely battered this island. So I want to bring in Councilman, Dauphin Island Councilman Gene Fox here, and we're going to talk a little bit about what has this hurricane season felt like here for Dauphin Island.
Boy, this is the year that just doesn't want to end and the season to go along with it. So it's been a long one. We're looking back all the way to Cristobal early this year and Sally, and hopefully we'll make it through this one. It'll be the last one for the year.
Yeah, I think we're all agreeing with you on that one. And you know, a major loss for Dauphin Island is the damage that the marina suffered. Tell us a little bit more about that and looking forward, what we're looking forward to there.
Well, it did. Sally really tore up the whole marina and the fuel docks there, and there's a lot of people that depend on the docks for their livelihood and the fuel. And so they're trying to get it back together as quick as they can. Of course, weather isn't helping, but we hope to have it back by next season.
And what does something like that mean for Dauphin Island? You said a lot of people use it for their livelihood. So how is this impacting people here?
Well, it is. It's a really important part of culture and the economy, and charter fishing and all the different boats that come and go, and really it's a connection from here to the Gulf. So.
And you know this area really well. How prepared do you think we are for Zeta after suffering from Sally?
I don't know how it could get any worse. So we've done the majority of the cleanup. I think we're just afraid at this point of already loose debris, trees that have half fallen or limbs hung up in trees, and we advise everybody to just take caution in their yard or out on the road.
And what is the feeling? Have you talked to many people? Are they getting ready? Are they feeling fatigued? How are they feeling?
I guess everybody's doing the minimal preparations for it. It hopefully will be a minimal storm in the scope of things.
Yeah, I think that's what we're all hoping for at this point, and hopefully the last one as well.
That's what we hope for.
Yeah. Gene, thanks so much for being with us.
Thank you.
And as we said, fingers crossed for the last storm.
We hope you'll come back for a sunny day visit sometime.
Listen, you and me both. Something a little different. Thanks so much, Gene. Yeah, because this is when you should be making your preparations for Zeta at this point. But as you can see, we've got the rain, we've got the breeze already picking up just from your typical run-of-the-mill type of system, type of storms that we're seeing. And these aren't even associated with Zeta, this rain that we're seeing right now. So, Carl, I can't stress enough that you want to get prepared. Prepare for power outages as well. When we're talking about the possibility of maybe hurricane force gust, you're going to see some power outages for this area again.
Yeah, that's right. And storm rapidly moving onshore, so bringing all that wind fairly far inland. Felicia, thank you so much. And let's talk about intensity. We do have some new intensity model guidance here, and you see some of the members taking it up to Category 1 intensity. Some of the members actually not bringing up the intensity that much over the next 24 hours. It's been really interesting to watch the evolution of this storm in the last, say, 15 hours. We saw this tremendous area of thunderstorms coming into the northeastern Yucatan, and then that waned really rapidly there as it was coming offshore. And we'll get back to this in a moment. We want to go now to Louisiana's governor. He's briefing the state on the latest information.
For being here again. Earlier today, I conducted a unified command group meeting with all of the various agencies of the state of Louisiana plus FEMA, and certainly we got an update from the National Weather Service on Hurricane Zeta. So I want to start the press conference there. The forecast since we spoke yesterday has largely remained the same as it relates to Zeta. We're still expecting a landfall early tomorrow evening in southeast Louisiana of a Category 1 hurricane. The primary impacts will be the wind, and most of the damage that will happen will occur because of the wind. However, there will be some storm surge associated with it. There will also be some rain, and there's always a potential that even though the overall rainfall totals from the hurricane will be relatively low, if you're in an area where a rain band sets up and drops for some period of time, you could have heavier rain than others. We also know that there is an increased potential for tornadoes to result because of the hurricane as well. But with the landfall tomorrow evening, that means that you really have the rest of today and tomorrow morning in order to prepare yourself and your family, your business, whatever it might be, for the impacts of the hurricane. One of the things about this storm that we actually like to see compared to other storms that move very slowly is that the storm should increase its forward speed. It's moving at about 14 miles per hour, I think, presently. When it makes landfall, it should be in the 20-mile-an-hour range and potentially a little bit faster than that. That's one of the reasons why we don't think there will be as much rainfall in the area. However, there will be considerable wind and the potential for wind damage, and as you know, that's damage to homes, businesses, but also to infrastructure and including our electrical system. We expect that the sustained winds will be greatest in the lower Terrebonne to St. Bernard area and extreme southeast Louisiana. But I want you to look at that storm track, and if the storm actually makes landfall where the western portion of the cone intersects with Louisiana's coastline, that puts the vast majority of the New Orleans metropolitan area in that zone for having the greatest impacts from this hurricane, and that is certainly a possibility. Further, I would remind everybody that 1/3 of the time a hurricane makes landfall completely outside of the cone. And so there's a lot of southeast Louisiana that really needs to be very mindful, very diligent, and needs to remain weather aware so that they know what's going on and they'll have a better idea of what they can expect. But with that hurricane making landfall tomorrow evening, it is imperative that people use the time they have available today and early tomorrow to make sure that they prepare themselves. No one should be complacent because it's late October, and it certainly feels like hurricane season should be behind us because historically speaking, we don't typically get them this late in the year. But hurricane season is not over, and in fact, it won't be over until the end of next month. I also do want to remind everybody that we are preparing for Hurricane Zeta and continuing to respond to Hurricanes Laura and Delta during a COVID public health emergency. And during this COVID-19 environment, it's imperative that everyone take the necessary precautions as you prepare for the storm and as you do anything, whether it's work-related or going to the store, whatever your daily activities are, please take every precaution. Because we are certainly seeing, and whether you call it the second wave or the third surge, we're seeing that all over the country today, and I'll get into our numbers here in just a moment. But it is absolutely imperative that individuals continue to wear their mask or the face covering, social distance when they're around people who are not from their immediate household, wash your hands frequently with soap and water, stay home when you're sick, and continue to protect those who are most vulnerable. Earlier this afternoon, I sent a letter to President Trump requesting yet another pre-landfall disaster declaration from the federal government. We are already coordinating with our federal partners for COVID and the other devastating storms that have already impacted our state. And earlier today, I was able to communicate with Pete Gaynor, the administrator of FEMA. So he is obviously paying attention to what's going on. And we have coordinating officer who's been embedded with us for months now, and we continue to have great partnership there with FEMA and all the other federal partners, but also working through FEMA Region 6 in Texas and the regional administrator there, Tony Robinson. Obviously, the pre-landfall disaster declarations are very helpful because it gets resources moving, and it allows us to know that we can take the necessary steps related to certain precautions and know that the federal government's going to help us with those, for example, as it relates to sheltering and so forth, should that become necessary. The Coastal Protection and Restoration Authority is tracking 689 gates across the coastal zone. As of this morning, 207 are closed. That's up from 181 yesterday. We don't envision that more gates will be closed other than just a potential handful, and that is unless there is another shift in the storm track to the west. If the track stays where it is, we don't anticipate many more gates being closed.
All right, that is Louisiana Governor John
received
Bell Edwards talking about preparations in the state of Louisiana, asking people to certainly not let their guard down because this is a very late season storm, and it definitely is a late season storm. And there's a lot of question about what exactly it's going to be. Intensity forecasting is always very difficult, but we see what has happened to the storm in the last 15 hours as it came on shore, certainly brought a wallop to the northeastern Yucatan, but is not nearly the same storm right now. And part of that is the fact that there is some drier air that is wrapped around the circulation and right into the core as well. You can actually see that part of that center is exposed right now. So, the critical period is really going to be the next 18 to 24 hours. Is it going to manage to get its act together? Now, what is in favor of the storm becoming more intense? Well, you've got a light wind environment aloft. You see how the high cloud is gradually sort of fanning out like that? That's an optimal environment with very strong wind well off to the north there. Eventually, the storm is probably going to run into some of that shear, but it's not going to happen until the very last minute, most likely. And so we do expect that there is going to be a decline in intensity as the storm is coming on shore. The other issue is water temperatures. Very, very warm water in the southern Gulf right now. Water temperatures do drop off in the northern Gulf. So again, this period of the next 18 hours or so is really critical because whatever the storm is as it's approaching, it's going to begin a slow decline after that as it runs into that cooler water. So right now it is forecast to be a Category 1 storm as it's coming on shore. Jackie, of course, we've got a new forecast package coming from the Hurricane Center within the next 45 minutes, and we'll see if they decide to make any changes.
All right, sounds good, Carl. We'll bring that as soon as it's available. Of course, impacts the most important things and preparing for that as well. And we are expecting this to make its way inland late Wednesday evening and continuing with the worst of the conditions into the overnight hours. Unfortunately, the storm, though, is going to be fast moving, so it will work its way into parts of the deep south, eventually into the mid-Atlantic and northeast by the end of the week. We've got hurricane warnings remaining in effect from Morgan City, Louisiana, over to the Mississippi-Alabama state line with alerts all surrounding that area. Notice that they go far inland up towards Montgomery. Rainfall will be somewhat of an issue. The fast-moving nature of the storm will help keep those totals down a little bit, but a lot of gold that we're seeing on the map there indicating 3 to 5 inches of rainfall. And I do think a few spots could see locally heavier amounts. So flash flooding will be a concern tomorrow from New Orleans on up through Montgomery into Birmingham, possibly even into the Atlanta metro area late tomorrow into your Thursday morning. Tropical tornadoes, certainly a possibility. We have torcons of 3 in Mobile and Pensacola.
As president, the first step I will take.
Hurricane season doesn't stop for a pandemic, and neither do we. Get the information you need to stay safe every day, right here on the Weather Channel.
That we couldn't put them out for at least a week later. And then after that, another storm comes. We had to do the same thing over again. Then your crabs go out again. It takes a while to come out of the mud and goes out of in the rivers. They got to come out of the rivers. So it's over and over again. No money to be made. That's the bad part about it.
Those are crabbers from northern Alabama, and it's just exacerbating the fact of what everyone is already dealing with. So many industries have not only felt the impact of the pandemic that we've all been dealing with, but they're feeling, especially along the northern Gulf Coast, the impact of these storms over and over again. So I'm on the east end of Dolphin Island, and we are in front of historic Fort Gaines. It has kind of been a focal point or a centerpiece of the east end of the island for about 150 years. This place is a popular tourist destination. People come to experience history here. However, round and round of storm is taking pieces of that away. You can see the fort over here. It gives great views of the Gulf of Mexico and Mobile Bay, but a little something here. This is one of the 11 most endangered historical sites because of shoreline erosion. These are the types of things that we're seeing when you're talking about rising water levels. You're talking about the impacts of storm surge over and over again. Places like this fort being acknowledged as being endangered because of things like shoreline erosion, and which of course happens when we have even more storms impacting the shore over and over again. So, it's not just the possibility of the danger to your life or your home. There are so many elements, Chris, that are impacting people here. We're talking about livelihoods. We're talking about things that they've known and they look to as part of their culture and their community, and these things are being impacted by these storms just over and over again.
Yes, and just this summer too, and going into fall now, of course, and hurricane season, we know, going through November. Hopefully this will be it here now that we're talking about Zeta. Exhausted the original list of hurricane names, and now onto the Greek alphabet. A 65-mile-per-hour tropical storm right now. It was a hurricane when it was over here in the Caribbean, weakened a bit as it went over by about 15 miles, weakened from 80 mile per hour to 65 miles an hour as it went over the Yucatan Peninsula. Now, once again, it is expected to strengthen. And the official forecast from the National Hurricane Center does have it by tomorrow morning becoming a Category 1, 85-mile-per-hour hurricane and possibly making landfall as a hurricane. However, any moment, no later than the top of the hour, we are expecting the latest forecast, the latest update from the National Hurricane Center. So we'll see if the intensity changes or if the track changes at all over the next, again, anytime up till the top of the hour. Jackie?
All right, sounds good, Chris. Another big weather story that we're tracking today, the ice storm underway in parts of Oklahoma. We've got new video in here from the Guthrie area. Watch this guy. Ooh, he steps out on his back deck. Oh, that makes you cringe. Narrowly gets missed by huge tree limbs that have been coming down. Here we're going to play it through again to just give you an idea of the weight of that ice that's been collecting on trees. Lots of folks here without power across central Oklahoma in particular. In fact, more than 300,000 in the state of Oklahoma itself. Some of the ice accretions are well over an inch. Our Dave Malkoff right now is in Oklahoma City, and he's got the latest from there. Dave?
This is a wild weather day here in Oklahoma City. This is freezing rain, kind of going back and forth between the freezing rain and the sleet happening here. We are losing power customers by the handful every couple minutes. People are going without power, more than 100,000 customers statewide. Here, you're looking at one of the people who is without power. The only reason why we have lights on us because we have a generator running around the corner, but not everybody has that. So the people who are at home are without power and they're without heat on this very, very cold day as Winter Storm Billy pushes over the state of Oklahoma and the city of Oklahoma City, where the streets are very slick and people out on the roadways are getting in lots and lots of accidents. We've even heard reports of structure fires, and also one woman stuck in a hotel elevator that had to be rescued by Oklahoma City fire officials who came and pulled her out of there, manually opening the door. In Oklahoma City, I'm Dave Malkoff, the Weather Channel.
Dave, freezing rain still coming down.
This is a wild weather day.
This is their earliest ice storm warning that they've ever had here in central Oklahoma, and the freezing rain is expected to continue into tomorrow. All those icicles you can see there, those are reports of accumulated or accretion from ice. And look at this, near El Reno, around an inch of accumulation. In fact, just west of there, northwest of there in Calumet, an inch and a half recorded. So that is a lot of weight. Still, that precipitation coming down. It comes down as liquid and then freezes on objects. Anything elevated, be very cautious if you have to travel at all. Probably wouldn't advise it, especially later on tonight. Bridges and overpasses are icy first. This will continue through the morning tomorrow and then finally changes to rain.
Subject to change, and again, we don't need this because we're fighting the levees on the Gulf side, and also you see me fighting the levees on the north side, building levees, but I don't have time to patch up things right now because it's moving so quick. We got all our pumps connected. We got generators ready to roll. The National Guard's bringing 6 generators in case electricity go out to keep our pumps running.
And it's a common story across the northern Gulf Coast. Hurricane-weary towns getting ready for yet again another one. This one, Zeta. Here's what we know right now at the Weather Channel. More voluntary evacuations ordered in Louisiana. Parts of Jefferson and Plaquemines parishes are under voluntary evacuations. The city of New Orleans also calling for voluntary evacuations of areas outside the levee. And a mandatory evacuation is currently underway in Grand Isle, Louisiana. And right now, this is a tropical storm, 65-mile-per-hour tropical storm coming up here within the half hour. We'll be hearing from the National Hurricane Center and hear what they say, what they think is going on with this, and see if the forecast does stand. As of right now, expecting hurricane conditions for parts of Louisiana with hurricane warnings in effect, including New Orleans and including the Gulf Coast here of Mississippi. The entire coastal area of Mississippi under hurricane warning, tropical storm warnings to the east into Alabama and portions of Florida. Here's the forecast, and the forecast does bring this back up to a hurricane by tomorrow morning and possible landfall as a hurricane tomorrow evening. So things really expected to ramp up, and we can see right here is Alabama, and right here is where we find meteorologist Felicia Combs, who joins us now live from Dauphin Island. Hello, Felicia.
Hey, Chris. Yeah, you know, the sun finally coming back out here in Dauphin Island. We're getting a little bit of a second to dry out from rain that's not even associated with Zeta yet. So, guys, if you're listening to me in the Dauphin Island area, take that chance when you get a break in the rain before tomorrow to get prepared for this storm. Now, we spoke with the mayor of Dauphin Island earlier, and he made such a great point about planning ahead and how either you decide if you want to leave or not, or Mother Nature will decide for you.
We only have one way on and off here, and the causeway, you know, will it flood this time? It's kind of hard to know. I think it's always a possibility, and it's like I always say, you know, there's a period of time where we can make the decision on whether or not to leave. There's another time that when Mother Nature makes that decision for us, when we can't leave. And so if you need to get off or want to get off, we would encourage you to go ahead and make that decision now before that decision might get made for you. In the meantime, our police department will monitor it every hour on the hour, and we'll try to keep people informed of the status. But once the floodwaters come in, it happens very quickly, and so there's not a lot of time to change your mind.
Yeah, and you know what? I think that might be the best way that I've ever heard it put. Either you decide or Mother Nature's going to decide for you. Now, here on Dauphin Island, there are no mandatory evacuations or anything like that in order, but a lot of times, like we see, after the storm is when things really get dicey. So much water here between the Bay and the Gulf of Mexico. Power outages are going to be a problem. Storm surge is definitely going to be an issue. The forecast for Dauphin Island and east to places like Navarre, Florida, 2 to 4 feet possible. To the west, 4 to 6 feet possible, and Dolphin Island sandwiched right there in the middle. So the different threats that we have here, again, tropical storm force winds. We've also got a flash flood watch in effect from rounds of rain that we're expecting. We've got that possibility for power outages and, of course, the storm surge, Carl. And then we'll throw in another element of the isolated tornado possibility because Dolphin Island is on that east side or that dirty side of the storm.
Yeah, so many things to watch for, and all this hinging on what exactly we're going to be looking at as it comes on shore. It is a very challenging intensity forecast. As you look at this thing over the last several hours here, you can see there's been some thunderstorm activity near the core, but drier air has been wrapping around the core, and so that is keeping it from re-intensifying here. So it's been holding at 65 miles per hour. I'm not sure that it's any stronger than that, or that it will be at 5 o'clock. But on the other hand, what you see is this area of high cloud that is expanding outward. That indicates a really favorable environment aloft. And so if that core can manage to fend off the dry air in, say, the next 12 to 18 hours, well, then it's probably going to be off to the races. There's plenty of warm water, and the upper level environment is very favorable, and there's no reason to believe that it wouldn't intensify going forward. So assuming that it will, we expect to see strong winds coming into southeast Louisiana late tomorrow, late afternoon into the evening, then moving up into Mississippi. Storm surge is going to be significant at that time in the evening. High tides will be late in the evening. We'll talk more about all these threats coming up in a few minutes.
Back in January, we knew that this was.
You're watching the Weather Channel. We are watching Tropical Storm Zeta. It is a tropical storm right now. The forecast is expected to bring it back to a hurricane. It made a landfall here on the Yucatan Peninsula as an 80-mile-per-hour hurricane, losing a little bit of gusto as it moved across the Yucatan Peninsula over land, but now it is back over water, and we'll see if it does get its act together once again. Starting to see a little bit more activity right up there just to the northwest of where the last center was. It's moving to the northwest at 14 miles an hour, and currently at 65 miles per hour. However, hurricane conditions are expected where there are hurricane warnings. Tropical storm conditions expected where there are tropical storm warnings, and they're possible. Tropical storm conditions are possible in yellow all the way up to portions of central northern Alabama, and even can't rule out parts of Georgia as well. Here's the forecast track for this, and the official forecast right now. We're going to get an update by the top of the hour at the very latest, but expected the latest forecast to be back to a hurricane by tomorrow morning. Also, storm surge warnings are posted here across coastal areas in South Louisiana, Mississippi, Alabama, and parts of the Florida Panhandle. So watching the multiple impacts we're going to get from Zeta. And again, Carl, we are expecting to get an update from the National Hurricane Center. What would surprise you with the update, and what are you expecting the most?
Well, I tell you, it's going to be a very tall order. You know, one thing that would be surprising is if we see a significant change in terms of the intensity forecast. Generally, they don't like to move around too much, responding to short-term changes in modeling. But one thing that we have seen in the modeling here is that the intensity forecasting is down just a bit, with some of the models taking it to hurricane and some of the models actually taking it or just leaving it steady as a tropical storm. And it's a very challenging forecast. And, you know, intensity forecasting in general is very challenging. But you can see what happened to the storm as it moved onshore. There was this big ball of convection, very formidable storm that came into Cozumel and Cancun last night. And then we saw that convection waning considerably. And now what has happened is that drier air has wrapped pretty much all the way around the circulation, kind of isolating that core there. Now, you look at the visible satellite imagery, and that core has been largely not seeing much thunderstorm activity at all until recently. Just a couple of thunderstorms, as Chris pointed out, showing up on the west side there. Will we continue to see that? Will it be able to fend off that dry air here in the next 12 to 18 hours? If it can do that, the upper level environment is very favorable. You can see that how the high cloud pattern is gradually expanding there. That's indicative of a light wind environment. It's even more favorable when you've got wind shear that is nearby but not over the circulation, which is exactly what we're seeing in this case. That actually improves the outflow when you've got those very strong winds, say off to the north of the circulation, as we're seeing in this case. And we don't think that the wind shear is going to have much impact until the storm is getting right next to the coast. And so very light wind environment for probably the next 12 to 18 hours. Then maybe towards 24 hours, we start to see those winds increasing some, and that is most likely going to have an impact and start to bring the intensity down. And by the way, we do have a new advisory from the Hurricane Center, and so not a surprise here based on what we're seeing on satellite. 65 mile per hour winds, now moving northwest at 14 miles per hour. And so just a little bit of an increase in forward speed there. Also, let's take a look at the forecast cone and see if there are any changes from the Hurricane Center. And I'm going to zoom in on this very briefly here. And so, yes, this is, precisely what I was thinking they probably would do, which is maintain that forecast, looking for an 80 mile per hour storm to come into southeastern parts of Louisiana. So Jackie, a lot of interesting stuff going on with the storm right now. I think we can hope, based on some of what we're seeing on satellite, that maybe it's not that strong when it comes in, but we can't count on it.
Yeah, got to prepare for the worst, I think, either way, Carl, for sure. Winds continue to be a huge problem in parts of California, and they are whipping multiple wildfires that are burning. NBC's Miguel Almaguer is there in hard-hit Orange County.
The situation here in Southern California has been fluid for the last 24 hours, and we expect it to stay that way for several more hours. Those powerful Santa Ana winds have sparked and fueled the fires you are seeing behind me here. There are neighborhoods. They were upwards of 95 miles an hour. That's the same force and power of a Category 2 hurricane. We're expecting those winds to subside later on today, but firefighters are really going to have their hands full. Miguel Almaguer, NBC News in Southern California.
Thanks, Miguel. Yeah, those offshore winds continue to be a problem here today, but they will wane by tomorrow, at least somewhat. We need rain. We've got none of that in the forecast, not for the next 7 days across parts of California. In the meantime, we've got red flag warnings that continue to fly here, especially in the favored terrain area where those winds are gusting more than 60 miles per hour, creating more critical fire conditions into valley areas as well as into the Bay areas. Here's a look at the forecast wind conditions for the rest of today. Notice how those winds do die down a bit for tonight. Still offshore tomorrow, but not nearly as strong.
At Cracker, we're cooking up warm feelings of
Some of our biggest issues are going to probably be related to our west end, which is quite vulnerable for storm surge and saltwater flooding. And so we've already put out notice to try to get individuals, again, to move their vehicles to higher ground, to the more interior parts of the island. We've also, the local water companies has said they may actually shut water off to that parts of the island. We've got a lot of damaged trees from the Sally, as you've mentioned. So we've got trees that are leaning, limbs that are hanging. We've got a lot of structures that are still in disrepair, and so as wind picks up, we're concerned about falling debris. So there's a lot of different things to be aware of at this time.
And here's why one of the reasons that Dolphin Island is so susceptible to that saltwater flooding. It's a barrier island. Now, I'm on the east end of Dolphin Island. The west end is a bit more susceptible to things like that storm surge flooding, but nonetheless, let me give you a little tour of where we are. So if we look way out this way, kind of in the distance, I'm not sure if you can make it out. There's still a little bit of a haze, but that is Fort Morgan Peninsula. So there's a ferry that runs in between Dolphin Island and Fort Morgan Peninsula, and these two land masses act as kind of the barrier to the mouth of Mobile Bay between the Gulf of Mexico. So the Gulf of Mexico is out that way. Now follow me. I'm going to not trip over these rocks this time. And then as we look back up this way, we're going to look toward Mobile Bay. So you can see water, water, water. That is the story here. And when you're talking about 4 to 6 feet of storm surge possible for an area like Dolphin Island, that is when you start to see some of those problems. I just want to show you something really quickly as well that I've noticed. Look at these water levels. So these water levels are pretty elevated at this point just because we do have an onshore flow right now, but we're approaching low tide. So imagine when we have tropical storm force winds persistently shoving that water this way during high tide, which is what we're going to have tomorrow night around 10 o'clock when we're dealing with Zeta. And Carl, as we know, especially when you're talking about the difference in the moon phases, approaching the full moon, you're talking about the tidal cycles, and then that storm surge, it can make all the difference, the timing of it.
Yeah, and that high tide coming in tomorrow night, right as we're seeing that very strong onshore flow. Felicia, thank you so much. And let's take a look at the latest advisory from the National Hurricane Center. Brand new forecast package has come out. And so now still a 65-mile-per-hour storm. It is moving northwest at 14, so picking up a little bit of forward speed as we've thought it would. Not incredibly well formed on satellite right now. You see there's a core there and there's an absence of cloud around that. Some drier air has wrapped into that circulation. But you also notice how the high cloud is really spreading out, really fanning out. And so the upper level environment is favorable. It's going to be over very warm water. And the thinking is that it is most likely on its way to becoming a hurricane once again. Forecast to become an 80-mile-per-hour storm as it is approaching, and it's going to be moving in tomorrow. So the basic forecast philosophy has not really changed. Very little change here in terms of the intensity and the track forecast. Taking it up into southeast Louisiana late tomorrow, then into the Mississippi Gulf Coast by very late tomorrow, and then over into Alabama and on into Atlanta beyond that. Now, one interesting change, and we don't have this for you graphically right yet, but tropical storm watches have been put up in North Georgia, including the Atlanta metro area. We're waiting for that information to come from the Weather Service office, but that reflects the fact that this storm is going to bring that strong wind very far inland. So you see the wind starting to come in into tomorrow afternoon and then into the evening, affecting New Orleans, Biloxi, Pascagoula, Mobile late tomorrow, then in the overnight coming up into Montgomery, and then, Jackie, by the time we get into Thursday morning, strong wind moving into Atlanta. And as you know, Jackie, there's still a lot of leaves on the trees in Atlanta and much of the South. And so that's going to mean those tree branches and trees come over a little more easily with that strong wind coming in.
Yeah, and this has happened before, too. I'm sure you remember Opal and all the damage that was caused years back. Before we hand things over to Weather Underground, guys, we just want to give you a big heads up what's going to be happening into the Northeast before we end the work week. The remnants and tropical moisture from Zeta is going to combine with some of the cold and the energy from our winter storm Billy and bring the first accumulating snowfall in some spots. I know we're showing you Boston. Boston, I would not take snow off the table for you. I think perhaps more of a wintry mix or a non-accumulating snowfall, but just to the west of there, things could get a little dicey for sure. This all gets started here on Thursday, starting out as rain in most areas across the region, and then that colder air starts to work its way in here on Thursday night. A wintry mix across parts of Pennsylvania into upstate New York, into western Massachusetts, Vermont, New Hampshire, the southern Green Mountains could be talking about double-digit snowfall potentially into the higher elevations. So this will continue through a good portion of your Friday before the whole thing exits offshore. This is a preliminary look at our forecast snowfall totals, and there you can see in the purple areas in the higher elevations, 5 to 8 inches of snow easy.
With every cup.
Action on Weather Underground, the Gulf Coast bracing for yet another hit. Tropical storm Zeta has moved back into the Gulf of Mexico tonight after battering Mexico's Yucatan Peninsula. It's expected to regain hurricane strength before landfall tomorrow. We have live coverage from the northern Gulf Coast where heavy rainfall, damaging winds, and life-threatening storm surge are all on the table. And Zeta's speed and interaction with Winter Storm Billy could spell bad news for major cities well inland, including Montgomery, Birmingham, Atlanta, and even Washington, D.C. We go in depth on where a swath of damaging winds could topple trees and cause widespread power outages.
And right now, Winter Storm Billy wreaking havoc across New Mexico, Texas, and especially Oklahoma, where this winter storm coated trees with nearly a half-inch of ice, snapping tree limbs, downing power lines. We've got the very latest on how long the icy conditions will last. And California's worst wildfire season on record continues with no end in sight, as multiple wind-driven blazes race through the southern part of the state, forcing tens of thousands of people to flee their homes. All of this next on Weather Underground.
Welcome in. We've got a special extended edition of Weather Underground for you tonight. I'm Mike Bettis.
I'm Alex Wilson. We are with you until 9 o'clock Eastern. We are tracking Hurricane Zeta's eventual landfall in the Louisiana Gulf Coast. By the way, our coverage here at the Weather Channel will continue beyond that. Dr. Nab will be up at 9 p.m. Eastern if you're looking for him. Now, the latest advisory officially has the city of New Orleans under a hurricane warning, Mike.
It does. And so we got the new advisory. Came in just a few minutes ago. Not huge changes happening with this latest advisory, but do want to show you where we stand. 65-mile-per-hour winds right now. Pressure dropped to just a millibar. Movement northwest at 14 has stayed somewhat consistent. But if you look at the satellite on this, it's really expanded here. The satellite presentation is actually pretty good. One thing we've really lacked, though, is any noticeable convection. There's a little bit of colder cloud tops near the center, but overall, the convection has waned quite a bit today, although we expect that to change. Hurricane warnings still remain in effect here in southeastern Louisiana, including in New Orleans. Also in coastal Mississippi, that does include Biloxi and Gulfport. Tropical storm warnings extend over to Mobile and Pensacola. And now notice, and here's the change that happened at the latest advisory. We now have tropical storm watches that extend up through Montgomery, Birmingham, and Atlanta. Actually goes all the way to the Tennessee and North Carolina state lines as we anticipate a very significant wind event in those locations. Storm surge warnings still in effect here, and those will go all the way up through landfall. And you can see there are some spots here, including through southeastern Louisiana and through coastal Mississippi, where up to 6 feet of storm surge will be possible. That's 6 feet above dry ground. When you take a look at the satellite, on the visible satellite, again, as it's coming off the Yucatan Peninsula here, it's got pretty good confined convection to it. It's got a compact shape to it, but as it comes and emerges off the coast of Mexico here, that really starts to expand. Some dry air has gotten pulled into there. You can see we've got some banding occurring, but just the last couple frames, a little bit of a colder and taller thunderstorms developing now near the center. The low itself may actually displace just to the north of where the convection is right now, but overall, what we're anticipating is a ramp up in wind speed and intensity. The steering so far has been mostly dominated by high pressure here, and the clockwise rotation around that has pushed it a little bit more to the northwest. However, over time, we expect the bigger player to become this big jet streak here that's going to push this now off to the north and to the east and accelerate it very quickly. That's all embedded within Winter Storm Billy there. Now, the shear, a very low wind shear environment right now, and low wind shear generally means you've got a favorable location and an atmosphere for intensification. All the jet energy is way up here, and eventually it will interact with that, but not yet. So we think, especially over the next 12 hours,
It's me and not Cantori, but little do they know. I've been in some eyes, and unfortunately, like you said, we are most likely not going to miss this one. We're here kind of on the north side of the city, on the southern side of Lake Pontchartrain. In fact, if you look this way, you can actually see off in the distance, it's maybe about a par 5 or a par 6 away. That's Lake Pontchartrain. It's Lakeshore Boulevard, a popular area for people to hike and bike and even fish on that area as well. But we're coming to you from the top of the levee here. They have a huge levee protection system, so we're feet well above where people are basically living. In fact, I'm 6'5", so basically there's another good maybe 4+ feet above my head. This huge gate, they push this across Lakeshore Boulevard here, so once this closes, there's no longer any car traffic going in or out of this area here. But again, we have steps there. People can actually still walk up and over if they happen to be living in this area, so they have some access getting out on foot, but not by car. But we've seen normal traffic. It's kind of rush hour here, so people out and about from school and or work. But we do have yet another system headed this way, Alex. And again, this is Zeta, expected to reform and strengthen back to a hurricane, our 27th named system of the year. And now it's going to be the 5th landfall of a tropical system and a 3rd hurricane here in Louisiana just this hurricane season. Alex?
Yeah, and if folks, Paul, are listening to that and exhausted already, we totally understand. Looking right now at Biloxi, Mississippi, 82 degrees. You're one of the spots that will be getting in on the rain, the wind with this system, and then getting into southern sections of Mississippi. So it's not going to be just the Biloxis, just the spots along the Gulf Coast, but rather interior sections as well that will be seeing that strong push of wind. In fact, we've got tropical storm watches well into parts of Alabama, even the state of Georgia. So onset of tropical storm force winds. This is our earliest arrival time, looking at midday Wednesday for a place like New Orleans, for a place like Grand Isle, getting into the late part of Wednesday around Mobile, Pensacola, and then beyond that for Montgomery. So make sure all preparations are done before that time, depending on where you live. Max wind potential, we're thinking those gusts in hurricane force likely across southeastern Louisiana. Now a place like New Orleans, like Gulfport, getting up into the southwestern portion of the state of Alabama. This is where I think we could be looking at 60-mile-per-hour winds, maybe even a little stronger. And then we've got the 40+ mile-per-hour gusts possible all the way up to just about the Georgia-South Carolina state line, the Georgia-Tennessee state line. So North Georgia will be looking at some strong winds. Keep in mind, we've had a lot of rain across portions of the south and east over the last few weeks. So ground saturated now. We're adding in more rain and also wind. I think down trees going to be a real concern here moving forward. Wind gust forecast. We start things off very early Wednesday morning, and you can see by late morning those winds already picking up across the Gulf Coast region. Then we get you into the afternoon and evening. Things begin to up the ante for Gulfport, for Pensacola. Now we're gusting 40 miles an hour. As we get into the late evening and overnight, Wednesday into Thursday, you can see those strong winds working into portions of southern Alabama. And then eventually, Mike, working well inland. So a lot of communities will be bracing for the possibility of power outages.
That's a huge concern for us here, Alex, and it goes well beyond the Gulf Coast. In fact, goes all the way up to Atlanta and beyond, where you now have a tropical storm watch in effect for Atlanta, Georgia, as we're anticipating some very intense winds to come your way here. We want to give you a real good heads up on what could happen here and what effects you might feel. All right, so let's take you to tomorrow evening, 10 o'clock. All right, so we've got landfall basically in Louisiana. Winds are relatively light across the southeast, but watch this now. 3 o'clock in the morning, we've got the center of circulation sitting down here. We've got really strong winds pumping up out of the southeast here. Montgomery, our winds are 60 to 75 miles an hour overnight. Almost a guarantee you're going to get some power outages. Those winds extend up to Birmingham, now edging over into Georgia. Atlanta overnight, your winds are 30 to 45 miles an hour. Now, this is really what's scary to me, is you've got a really strong corridor of winds here from around Montgomery to Birmingham to Atlanta to Macon, Georgia. 60 to 75 mile-per-hour wind gusts possible in Atlanta, and there's the timing. At your morning rush, that's 7 o'clock in the morning. So now you're putting a lot of volume on the roadways with a very intense wind and rain event. And I think when you consider that how many trees still have their leaves on them across the southeast because they haven't fallen yet for the season, this is a very big deal. A lot of trees could come down, posing danger to you, and also a huge power outage event. The winds still extend into North Carolina and South Carolina, going through late morning, 40 to 50 mile per hour winds from Columbia to the upstate of South Carolina, Asheville to Charlotte to Raleigh, and then extending right into the Delmarva here. Look at this, Richmond. We think a place like Cape May, potentially even Washington, D.C., 40 to 50 mile per hour winds late Thursday, and eventually pushing its way out, but in its wake, even still pretty gusty winds. It could be 35 to 40. Flooding, not as huge a concern as you might expect. I think the forward movement, the forward speed, which accelerates, limits the huge amounts of rain. Having said that, some of these areas are very, very saturated. We've got very, very high saturation in the soil right now, so it won't take a lot, but we're not talking extreme amounts of rainfall that we would if we had a slower moving storm. So I think in that regard, it's good news. The problem is we get a very wet ground, and so you have weakened root systems, and so big winds that topple these trees over, these trees come over very, very easily. Possible flooding here from near Little Rock, but more the Boot Heel and Memphis over toward Knoxville, Asheville, and down through New Orleans. Look at the European model as far as the forecast goes. Really heavy rain in the corridor, very close there to the coastline. But then another slug of really heavy rain across the Tennessee Valley, extending into the mountains of western North Carolina. Alex?
Talk about a close call, right? That's an Oklahoma man who just missed getting hit by a falling tree in Guthrie, Oklahoma yesterday. That tree just one of hundreds that came down across central Oklahoma, northern Texas. Winter Storm Billy has brought crippling ice to this region. Doesn't take much ice accumulation. Now, we talk about a quarter to a half an inch to bring down those tree limbs. So he's really lucky. Not to mention things like that wood deck he was stepping on. Those things are they're like ice rinks when you get a little bit of ice glazed up on those. So you really got to be careful. So many times in the winter, I know, not even a joke, people really get hurt. So please use caution taking that first step out of your house, into your driveway, on the back porch, out to get the mail, because things have been very, very icy across the region. Oklahoma City still holding at 32 with freezing rain. Lubbock, freezing rain temperatures in the upper 20s. We've got 25 in Roswell. So there, that cold air throughout the column, that's allowed us to see the snow. We've got the warm air aloft over Lubbock. So we've got rain falling with that very cold air at the surface, freezing on contact. Elk City's at 30. Chickasha is at 32. Likely still seeing some of that freezing rain around there, although there are a few areas where some flurries have worked through. But man, Oklahoma City, you have been in the thick of it. Eventually, we are going to see that column warm up, so that cold air at the surface erodes away, and then we're going to be able to see that change over to just rain. But still, several hours ahead for the freezing rain this evening and early overnight. I think by 5, 6, 7 a.m. we finally get that surface temperature above the freezing mark, and that's going to allow us to just be dealing with a cold rain into the start of the day on Wednesday. So we timed this out for you, and again, overnight through the remainder of today, we still have the mix. We still have the areas of ice. That's that pink. So parts of Oklahoma and Texas will remain very dangerous. 4 o'clock in the morning, Oklahoma City has seen the transition to rain, but still plenty of areas back into even southwestern Kansas, all the way into Texas and western Oklahoma. You still have the freezing rain. Eventually, we go through the day, and I think once we get beyond lunchtime, Mike, we'll finally see that change to just rain on the warm side of this, and then the backside parts of the Texas Panhandle, New Mexico will be getting the snow.
You know, it's been a huge issue for us in Oklahoma, in particular with the power outages. There you are. Look at Oklahoma City, where it's sitting at 32 degrees. Boy, we are right on the edge, right? And so we've gotten the ice. Winds at times have been gusty, and so that has been the reason we've had so many power outages. They've really ramped up throughout the day today. You know, if you take a look at where we stood last night, we were in pretty good shape, and then the ice accretion came, and now we've got power outages in Oklahoma that stand at 314,000, with a lot of those coming from late morning to now. And so want you to be aware of what's coming your way here, folks, and want you to make sure that you're operating generators properly. If you are indeed operating a generator, you look at where the core of it is. It's right there in central Oklahoma, including in Oklahoma County and Oklahoma City. 164,000 customers without power. Cleveland County, the Pottawatomie, Canadian, Logan counties follow thereafter. Then you look at how we operate our generators and how we do it safely. I know a lot of you might be firing those up this evening to power up a refrigerator, microwave, lights, your chargers. Operate it outdoors. Never run it indoors, not in the garage. Do not plug it into the walls. You want to use a heavy-duty extension cord to plug in your appliances. Turn the generator on before plugging the appliances into it. But the key thing is outside. It's a combustible engine here, and what you need to do, a combustion engine, you need to do operate it outside like you would a car. Run it with the appliances running one at a time. Operate under a canopy or a structure that keeps it dry. Alex?
All good information. Want everybody to make it safely out of this one. A very survivable storm if you play your cards right. Well, coming up on the show, much more on our top story, the Gulf Coast bracing for Zeta. We've got live coverage. We'll get you back out to Paul Goodlow.
America is facing a serious wildfire crisis, and the threat is still far from over. Every day, the Weather Channel takes you to the front lines of a historic fight, being fueled by changes in our environment like never before.
These are not just wildfires, they are climate fires.
No one covers our wildfire threat better than the Weather Channel.
Hurricane season continues, and so does our coverage here at the Weather Channel. Welcome back to Weather Underground. I'm meteorologist Paul Goodlow here in New Orleans, standing by one of the kind of levee gates that they could be closing depending on the forecast and how much surge we could see here. Lake Pontchartrain is kind of behind the camera. You can kind of pan right. You see those homes. But the city has ordered a mandatory evacuation for people outside of levee protection system because of the forecast for a storm surge as we have Hurricane Zeta about 24 hours or so from making landfall, the third hurricane to make landfall in the state just this year alone. And Mike, we're not just dealing with a coastal issue with this system. Now we have watches all the way into Atlanta.
Yeah, it's really amazing when you think how far the winds are going to spread with this and how intense those winds will be. All right, Atlanta, I want to give you the early heads up here. What could be coming your way? It's 74 degrees right now. Been a little drizzly for you today and overcast, but tropical storm watches now in effect for Atlanta. We think the winds could be very gusty, and with leaves still on the trees, most of the trees right now, we think that power outages are going to be very, very common. In fact, you look at the areas where widespread power outages are forecast, it goes all the way up to the Atlanta metro area. It does include New Orleans, Mobile, Montgomery, Atlanta, and then likely outages extend all the way up into Asheville and Greenville. So there'll be numerous metropolitan areas where power outages are going to be common, unfortunately. All right, so here's how it all plays out for you. I'm going to take you through this hour by hour so you get an understanding of it. We're going to get a landfall tomorrow evening. Low's going to come inland here, in through Louisiana and Mississippi Thursday overnight. And now you've got some really intense winds hitting us here in Montgomery. Look at the red on the map here, all right? That shows you really intense winds in Pensacola, Mobile, and Montgomery. 60 to 75 mile per hour winds, more than enough to take down some power lines here. Now let's advance this. Let's go to 7 o'clock in the morning. And I think this is a really, really key time, all right? We've got strong winds in a corridor here from Montgomery to Macon, Atlanta, near Chattanooga, and over toward Birmingham. 60 to 75-mile-per-hour winds at the beginning of rush hour in Atlanta. I think that the power outages are going to be widespread. I think you're going to have the danger of falling trees on cars and on homes, so it's a very, very dangerous time. And then notice here, as we go into Thursday, late morning, early afternoon, 40 to 50-mile-per-hour winds from Columbia to Greenville, Asheville to Charlotte to Raleigh. These are all places still where we've got leaves on trees, where, again, you're going to get these trees that are top-heavy. They catch a lot of wind, and they topple over. Still now, Richmond, Thursday night, 40 to 50-mile-per-hour winds that goes right out through eastern North Carolina, that goes out through the Delmarva here. Wouldn't even rule out Washington, D.C. and Baltimore getting those kind of winds, Alex. So a very intense wind event that goes all the way from one coast to the other, Gulf Coast to Atlantic Coast.
And another story we are closely monitoring on the West Coast, explosive fires. This just one of them, the Silverado fire burning in East Orange County. You can see tens of thousands of residents. Well, you can't see, but you can see the homes burning. So tens of thousands of residents are under evacuation orders for fears that their neighborhoods could be next. The 11,000-acre brush fire started yesterday morning. It's just 5% contained, and that thing just exploded yesterday. So unfortunately, fire scenes continue. We knew what a troublesome setup we've got with the very, very strong winds that have allowed those fires to start, and then once they start, spread very rapidly. So we look at the danger today, elevated risk of fire here across southern sections of the state of California, or rather middle part of California, I should say. It's Sacramento, getting over towards the San Francisco area. San Francisco, you're elevated, critical as we head into the interior parts of the state. But look at the relative humidity values. We are talking single digits, low teens. And when you're in that range, you've got exceptionally dry conditions. Anything on the ground is very dry. Now, as we head through the evening, see things increase a bit closer to the coast. So we'll actually have some of that wind coming in off the water, and that's going to help to bump the humidity up. But you can see tomorrow afternoon, right around lunchtime, we'll see those numbers really begin to bottom out once again. And they don't quite get those levels of moisture into the central part of the state. So that's why conditions just a little bit more favorable there for fires to start. Wind gust forecast looks like this. You can see those pinks and reds indicating 35, 40, 45-mile-per-hour gusts, relaxing a bit as we head into the overnight, but picking up once again as we go through the day tomorrow. So we'll be watching especially the mountainous areas, and Mike, you get those canyons, and those winds can really accelerate through there.
Intense event, no doubt. Alex, thank you. And still to come on Weather Underground, much more in our top story. Tropical storm Zeta, we're breaking down the timing for heavy rainfall, damaging life-threatening storm surge as the Gulf Coast braces for another landfall, likely intensifying into a hurricane before landfall. There's the track that comes into southeast Louisiana, goes all the way through New Jersey by Friday morning.
This program brought to you by Gilead.
I wanted my